The repair bay was loud and dirty. It was a big room inside a huge alien warship. The air smelled like electricity and old grease. Tools hung on the walls and pieces of broken machines were everywhere. In the middle of all this, a young woman named Jin was working. She was focused on her task. Jin was a technician. Her job was to fix things. Right now, she was fixing a very large suit of armor. The armor was made for a Cathar warrior. The Cathar were a strong reptilian species. They had big bodies, sharp claws, and scaly skin. They had won the war against humans. Now, humans like Jin worked for them. The armor on her workbench was covered in marks and dents. It had seen many battles. Jin worked carefully. She used a small welding tool to fix a hole in the chest plate. The hole was from a plasma blast. Her hands moved with skill and confidence. She did not look up or get distracted. The owner of the armor stood nearby. His name was Tarek. He was a large Cathar warrior. He was much taller and wider than Jin. He watched her work, but he did not look happy. He was impatient. He tapped a sharp claw on the metal table. The sound was loud and annoying. "You are slow, human," Tarek said, his voice a deep growl. "Is this the best speed your kind can manage?" Jin did not answer him. She kept her eyes on her work. She was used to these kinds of comments. The Cathar thought humans were weak and slow. They saw them as useful workers, but not as equals. Jin had learned it was better to stay quiet and just do her job. She finished sealing the hole. She put down the welding tool and picked up a grinder. She started to smooth out the rough edges. The grinder made a high-pitched sound. Sparks flew into the air around her. She wore protective goggles over her eyes. Tarek let out a low sound of frustration. "The war games are soon. I need my armor. I cannot fight in a damaged shell because a human was daydreaming." Jin still did not speak, but inside she felt a small flicker of anger. She was not daydreaming. She was making sure his armor was perfect. A mistake could mean his death in battle. She took her work very seriously. She believed in doing things right. She moved to the next damaged section. This one was on the shoulder. It was a deep cut, like from a giant blade. She began to clean the area, wiping away dirt and dried fluid. As she worked, the sleeve of her loose jumpsuit slid up her arm a little. Under the bright light of the glow lamp, something on her wrist became visible. It was a simple bracelet. On it was a small metal emblem. The emblem showed a ring around a planet with a single star above it. It was the symbol of the Earthborn Defense Fleet. It was the symbol of the human military that had fought the Cathar and lost. Tarek's eyes, which had many facets like an insect, saw the emblem. His tapping finger stopped. His low growling stopped. The whole room seemed to get quieter. Jin felt the change in the air. She paused her work for a second. She could feel his stare on her wrist. Slowly, she looked up from the armor. She saw Tarek looking directly at the emblem on her bracelet. His expression was no longer just impatient. Now it was cold and dangerous. He took a step closer to her. His large shadow fell over her and the workbench. He was so big he blocked the light. "You," he said, his voice a harsh whisper. "You are Earthborn." It was not a question. It was an accusation. The word hung in the air between them. Earthborn. It was more than just a place. It was a statement. It meant she was not from some quiet colony that had surrendered easily. It meant she was from the world that had fought the hardest. The world that had made the Cathar bleed for their victory. Tarek's large, clawed hand moved faster than Jin would have thought possible for someone his size. It closed around her wrist. His grip was like iron. It was not meant to hurt her, not yet, but it was firm and unbreakable. He forced her arm up, making the emblem on her bracelet clearly visible under the bright worklight. "You hide this from me," he hissed. His voice was low and full of threat. "You are Earthborn and you touch my armor?" Jin did not struggle. She knew it was useless. He could break her arm with a quick twist. She held herself very still. Her heart was beating fast in her chest, but her face showed no emotion. She had learned to hide her fear a long time ago. She looked from his angry face down to his hand around her wrist. Then she looked back up at him. Her eyes were calm. She did not look away. "I am a technician," she said, her voice even and quiet. "My job is to repair." "That is all. That is not all," Tarek snarled. He pulled her arm a little closer, his snout almost in her face. The smell of him was strong, like old leather and spice. "This symbol means you are a warrior. A defeated warrior. Your fleets are dust. Your cities are ashes. Why do you wear this? To remember your failure?" Jin took a slow breath. She could feel the cold metal of his claws against her skin. "I wear it to remember my home," she said. "Your home is gone?" Tarek said. He was trying to make her angry. He wanted to see her break. He wanted the fear he expected from a human when faced with a Cathar warrior. The brave humans of Earth, they fought so well. And they died screaming when their orbital rings fell. He waited for her to cry. He waited for her to beg. He watched her eyes, expecting to see tears, but Jin's eyes did not change. They were still calm. They were still sad. She did not respond to his taunt. Instead, she did something he did not expect. With her free hand, she pointed to the armor on the table. "This damage?" she said, her finger hovering over a series of deep, jagged cuts on the left shoulder plate. "This is from Avkel's sonic cannon. Their weapons are rare. Not many warriors have faced them and lived to tell about it." Tarek's grip on her wrist loosened just a little. He was confused. How did this human technician know about Vel weaponry? Jin did not wait for him to speak. She moved her finger down the armor to the leg piece. "And this scoring," she said, pointing to a pattern of blackened lines, "this is the mark of a Zark energy lance. It leaves a unique burn." She looked up at him. "You fought in the Tarkinus campaign." Tarek was completely silent. His anger was still there, but now it was mixed with surprise. The Tarkinus campaign had been a brutal conflict in a distant star system. It was not a famous battle. It was a dirty, grinding war of attrition. No simple technician should have known about it. How do you know this?" he finally asked, his voice less of a growl and more of a question. Jin's gaze was steady. She looked at the armor not as a piece of equipment, but as a story. She saw every mark and every dent as a page from a history book. A history she knew very well, then her eyes moved to a different part of the armor. It was a deep, terrible gash near the main power core on the chest. It was a wound that should have been fatal. She reached out with her free hand and gently touched the broken edge of the metal. Her voice became very quiet. Almost a whisper. "And this," she said. "This is not from an energy weapon or a cannon. This is a wound from a boarding axe. A very old weapon, used only in the closest, most personal fights." She looked from the gash up into Tarek's eyes, from the final assault on the Sol defense perimeter. She paused, letting the weight of the words settle in the air. The Sol defense perimeter was the last line of defense for Earth. Its fall meant the end of the war. "You were there," Jin said, her voice still quiet but now very clear. "You were on the flagship." "The Worldbreaker's fist?" Tarek's breath caught in his throat. He was staring at her, his many-faceted eyes wide. He could not understand how she could know this. It was impossible. Jin was not finished. Her finger was still resting next to the terrible gash in the armor. "And you were there?" she said. Her eyes locked on his. When the human flagship, the Odyssey, fell, the name of the human ship was a ghost in the room. The Odyssey. Its destruction was a famous victory for the Cathar. It was the moment the war was truly won. Tarek had been there. He had seen it die. He had fought on its broken decks. He stared at Jin. His mind was racing. How could she know? How could this quiet human woman, with her calm eyes and skilled hands, know the exact ship he had been on during the most important battle of the war? His grip on her wrist fell away completely. He took a small step back. The anger was gone from his face, replaced by pure confusion. He looked at her, then at the gash in his armor, then back at her. "That is a guess," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier force. It was weak. Jin slowly lowered her arm. She rubbed her wrist where his claws had been. She did not look away from him. Her expression was still calm, but now there was a deep, old pain in her eyes. A pain he recognized. It was the same pain he saw in the eyes of veterans who had lost too much. "It is not a guess," she said softly. She looked down at the terrible wound in the armor. Her voice was so quiet he had to lean closer to hear her over the hum of the ship. "My brother Chol was a Marine on the Odyssey," she said. The words were simple, but they explained everything and nothing at the same time. Tarek felt a cold feeling in his stomach. He had fought the Marines of the Odyssey. They had been brave. Foolishly, hopelessly brave. They had fought for every centimeter of their dying ship. Jin continued, her eyes seeing something far away. "A memory. We had a tight beam communication. For a few minutes when the boarding started, the signal was bad. There was so much noise." She took a slow breath as if the memory was heavy to carry. "He was trying to be brave for me. But I could hear the fear in his voice. He said they were being overrun. He said something strange happened." Tarek was completely still. He was not a warrior listening to a technician anymore. He was a soldier listening to a story about a battle he had been in. A story from the other side. He said his squad was trapped in a corridor. A hull breach had opened behind them. There was no way out. A Journeyan berserker was coming for them. Tarek's blood ran cold. The Journeyans were not part of the Cathar forces. They were mercenaries, savages. They were known for their cruelty and their strength. They loved to kill. They showed no mercy to anyone, not even their allies. Every soldier feared them. Jin's voice was a whisper now. Chol said they were going to die. They were ready to fight the berserker, but they knew they would lose. Then he said a Cathar centurion appeared. Tarek's eyes widened. A centurion. It was his own rank. "This centurion," Jin said, "he saw the Journeyan. He saw the human squad. And he made a choice. He turned his back on the humans. He stood between them and the berserker. He fought it alone." The repair bay was silent. The sounds of the ship seemed to fade away. Tarek was listening, his heart pounding. He remembered the Journeyan. He remembered the corridor. He remembered the hopelessness. "Chul said it was the most brutal fight he had ever seen," Jin continued. "The centurion and the berserker, they were like two forces of nature. The centurion's armor was damaged, but he would not fall. He held the line. He gave Chul and his squad time to seal the hull breach and find another way out." She looked directly at the deep gash in the chest plate on the table. Chul said, "Just as they were getting away, the Journeyan landed a final blow. With a boarding axe. It hit the centurion here." She pointed to the exact spot on the armor. Right in the power core housing. Chol saw it happen. Tarek could not breathe. He remembered the searing pain. He remembered the world going dark. He remembered falling. "Chol was a good person," Jin said, her voice thick with emotion. "He saw a fallen soldier, an ally for one moment in the chaos. He tried to go back. He tried to drag the centurion to safety." He was shouting. He was shouting his name into the cums, telling him to hold on. She looked up at Tarek, her eyes shining with unshed tears. But the fire was too heavy. His squadmates pulled him away. The last thing Chol saw was the centurion on the ground and the Journeyan standing over him. She paused. We never heard from Chol again. The story was finished. The silence in the bay was heavy. Tarek looked at the woman in front of him. He saw her not as a human, not as a technician, not as an Earthborn. He saw her as the sister of a brave soldier, a soldier who had tried to save his life. He looked down at his own armor, at the gash he had carried for years, the gash that should have killed him. He had never known why the Journeyan had not finished him off. He had woken up in a Cathar medical bay, told that a recovery team had found him. He never knew a human Marine named. Chol had tried to save him. He never knew that Marine had a sister, and now, that sister was the one repairing the very armor he had worn that day. She had recognized the scars. She had known the story they told. She was fixing the wound that had nearly killed him, not as a job, but as a quiet tribute to her brother's last act of kindness. Tarek did not know what to say. The words, "thank you," felt too small and did not belong in this place. The words, "I am sorry," felt just as useless. So he said nothing. He just stood there looking at Jin, and for the first time, he saw a person who understood the cost of war as deeply as he did. The silence between them was long and deep. It was not an empty silence. It was full of memories and understanding. Tarek looked at Jin, and he no longer saw a weak human. He saw a person who had lost as much as he had. He saw a person who carried a heavy history. He looked down at the gash in his armor. For years it had been a mark of a terrible fight, a reminder of a time he had almost died. Now it was something more. It was a connection, a shared moment in a terrible war, a moment of unexpected kindness in the middle of so much death. Jin watched him. She saw the change in his eyes. The anger was gone. The pride was gone. Now there was only a kind of tired respect. She slowly picked up her tools again. She did not say anything. She simply went back to work. She began to repair the deep gash. Her movements were careful and precise. She was not just fixing metal. She was healing an old wound. A wound that was important to her. It was the last place her brother had been. It was the last thing her brother had tried to save. Tarek finally found his voice. It was quiet and rough. Your brother... Chul, he was brave. Jin's hands paused for a second. She nodded, her eyes still on her work. Yes, he was. He did not have to try to save me, Tarek said. We were enemies. Jin looked up at him. He said you were not an enemy in that moment. He said you were a soldier like him. You were fighting a monster to save lives. He would never leave a soldier behind. Tarek thought about this. The Cathar code was about strength and victory. It did not talk about saving enemies, but he understood honor. He understood the bond between soldiers who faced death together. What Chul had done was a higher form of honor than any Cathar ritual. He saved my life, Tarek said. The words felt strange in his mouth. He was a Cathar warrior. He was strong. He did not need saving, and certainly not from a human, but it was the truth. If Chul had not distracted the journeyman, if he had not tried to pull him to safety, the recovery team would have found a corpse. Jin gave a small, sad smile. And you saved his. For a few more minutes at least. You gave him a chance. That was all he ever asked for. A fighting chance. She continued her work, sealing the deep cut with a new layer of bonded metal. She smoothed it out until it was almost as good as new. The terrible scar was gone, replaced by a clean, strong repair. Just as she was finishing, the heavy door to the repair bay slid open with a loud hiss. Another Cathar walked in. This one was older. His scales were a darker color, and he wore the markings of an overseer. He was a manager. He was in charge of the human workers. The overseer looked at Tarek and then at Jin. His eyes were critical. Is the warrior's gear ready, human? He barked at Jin. His tone was dismissive and rude. Do not keep the claw of Tarek waiting with your slow work. We do not have all day for your kind to daydream. Jin froze. Her head was down. She prepared herself for more insults. This was normal. This was her life, but before she could even open her mouth to answer, Tarek moved. He took a large step forward, placing his massive body partly between Jin and the overseer. He stood up to his full height, which was much taller than the overseer. He looked down at him, his expression hard and commanding. The work is not ready, Tarek said. His voice was a low boom that filled the entire bay. The overseer was surprised. He blinked his large eyes. What? The schedule says, I do not care what the schedule says, Tarek interrupted, his voice even louder. He pointed a claw at Jin. You will not rush an artisan. The word hung in the air, artisan. It was not a word used for human workers. It was a word of great respect. It meant a master of a craft. The overseer was confused. She is just a technician. A human. This one does not merely repair, Tarek said, his voice firm and clear. She honors the steel. He looked back at Jin, who was watching him with wide, shocked eyes. He gave her a slow, respectful nod. Then he turned back to the overseer. She understands the story and the scars. My life rests upon her work. Her hands bring the metal back to life. I will have no other touch my armor. Do you understand? The overseer looked from Tarek's fierce face to Jin's stunned one. He did not understand at all, but he understood authority. Tarek was a respected claw, a proven warrior. His word carried weight. The overseer dipped his head in a quick, nervous gesture. As you say, Claw, my apologies. He turned and quickly left the bay, the door hissing shut behind him. Silence returned to the room. Jin was still holding her tool. She was staring at Tarek. No one had ever defended her like that. No Cathar had ever spoken about her work with such respect. Tarek turned to face her. The hard look was gone from his face. It was replaced by that same tired respect. Finish your work, he said gently. Take all the time you need. Jin nodded slowly. She looked down at the armor. Then she looked back at her wrist. The Earthborn Emblem was still there, fully visible now. She did not need to hide it. Not from him. She picked up a polishing cloth and began to gently buff the newly repaired section. She was no longer just a human fixing an alien's armor. She was a sister, honoring the memory of her brother and the warrior he tried to save. And he was the warrior, finally understanding the debt he owed. Jin worked for a long time after the overseer left. The air in the bay was different now. It was quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet. Tarek did not pace or tap his claws. He simply stood and watched her work. He watched the careful, sure movements of her hands. He saw how she treated the armor not like a piece of equipment, but like something important. Something with a history. She did not rush. She checked every connection. She tested every seal. She polished the entire surface until the dark metal shone under the bright lights. She was making it perfect. For her brother, for the warrior who had saved him, for herself. Finally, she put down her tools and the polishing cloth. She stepped back from the workbench. The armor was complete. It looked strong and new, but it still carried the marks of its past. The new repairs were like clean scars over old wounds. The story was still there, but it was ready for new chapters. It is finished, Jin said. Her voice was soft. Tarek stepped forward. He looked at his armor. He ran a claw over the place where the terrible gash had been. The surface was smooth and solid. He could feel the strength of the repair. It was better than new. It had been fixed with skill and with care. He looked at Jin. He saw the tiredness in her eyes, but also a sense of peace. He knew this had been more than a job for her. It had been a journey, a way to touch the last moments of her brother's life. Thank you, Tarek said. The words were simple, but he put his whole heart into them. He was thanking her for the repair. He was thanking her for her brother's bravery. He was thanking her for helping him remember that honor could be found in strange places, even in the face of an enemy. Jin nodded. You are welcome. Tarek began to put the armor on. The pieces were heavy, but they clicked into place with a satisfying sound. Jin helped him with the smaller clasps on the back, her human hands nimble where his large claws were clumsy. It was a small thing, but it was a sign of their new understanding. They were not friends. They could never be friends in a world like this. But they were no longer just a warrior and a technician. They were two people connected by a moment in time. When the last piece was secured, Tarek stood tall in his full battle armor. He looked like a mighty warrior again. He flexed his arms, testing the movement. Everything was perfect. There were no stiff joints, no weak points. It felt better than it had in years. He looked down at Jin. She was small standing next to him in his powered suit. But she did not look small to him anymore. She looked strong in a way he was only beginning to understand. The war games will be easy now, he said, a hint of his old pride returning to his voice. Jin allowed herself a small, real smile. Good, he turned to leave. He walked toward the large bay door. But he stopped before he reached it. He turned back to look at her one more time. She was standing by her workbench, watching him go. The Earthborn Emblem was still clearly visible on her wrist. It did not look like a mark of defeat to him anymore. It looked like a badge of courage. A promise to remember. His name was Chull, Tarek said, his voice echoing slightly in the helmet. I will remember it. Then he turned and left. The bay door hissed shut behind him. Leaving Jin alone in the quiet room, she stood there for a long moment, listening to the hum of the ship. She looked at her tools, at the empty workbench, at her hands. She felt a feeling she had not felt in a long time. It was not happiness. It was not sadness. It was something like closure. A circle had been completed. Her brother was still gone. The war was still lost. But a piece of his story had been recovered. His last act of bravery had been acknowledged by the very person he tried to save. It was a strange and painful kind of justice, but it was something. She picked up her polishing cloth and began to clean her tools, putting them away in their proper places. Her movements were slow and thoughtful. The world had not changed. The Cathar were still in charge. Humans were still servants. But in this one, small repair bay, something had shifted. She knew that Tarek would not look at her the same way again. And she would not look at the Cathar the same way either. They were not just monsters. They were soldiers, like her brother had been. They had their own stories, their own losses. She finished cleaning and turned off the main glow lamp. The bay was plunged into dim, shadowy light. As she walked to the door, she touched the emblem on her wrist. It felt warm against her skin. She stepped out into the corridor, ready to face the rest of her day. She was still a human technician on an alien ship. But she was also Jin, the sister of Chull, and now one warrior among the Cathar knew what that name meant. And for now, in a universe that had taken so much from her, that felt like a victory,